G'day everybody and welcome back to the Pillar Performance Podcast, where we dive into all things at the forefront of high performance research and the people helping reshape that research as well. At Pillar, we are on a mission to get athletes to their start line in the best condition. We're transforming health from merely preventative into performance-driven. We do that by developing clinical supplements that enhance your sleep, recovery, can reduce inflammation, boost energy, and also ensure a strong immune system. We have a great episode ahead of us. I am honoured to welcome Dr. Darren Candow, a celebrated research expert in science and nutrition from the University of Regina in Canada. Dr. Candow is the driving force behind the Aging Muscle and Bone Health Laboratory at the university, and he has pioneered so much research in regards to improving musculoskeletal health through a really dynamic interplay of both exercise and nutrition. He has over 70 peer-reviewed papers on creatine, which will be the topic that he and Dan are going to be diving in today. Specifically, creatine is very, very, very highly spoken about right now, and there is a reason for that. What Dan and Dr. Candow are going to be talking about are the balance between how creatine operates with protein, how creatine can operate and the interaction that it has with caffeine, are many of the myths around creatine, including hydration and weight gain concerns that are slowly diminishing, but are still out there in the wider market. They talk about the effectiveness of different forms of creatine, from monohydrate down to the new forms you'll see in gummy form, and how creatine can benefit athletes, older people, and clinical populations alike. Fantastic deep dive into this subject. Obviously has all the benefits that are also established with creatine now, and why it is now the most researched and fastest moving supplement on the market. I hope you enjoy. Let's get stuck into it.
Dr. Darren Candow, welcome to the Pillar Performance Podcast. I have to say I've been very excited about having you on, and it's been a long wait to get you on as well. So it's been the anticipation has been building, and I kept on looking down my calendar. So is it nearly here yet? It's like waiting for Christmas. So welcome. Thanks for being here.
No, thanks so much for having me and the patience I was scheduling. And very excited to talk to you today for sure.
I guess it's a good starting point because, I remember, I've been doing endurance sports for a very long time, since I was 9 years old. And, creatine was always talked about. I think it's even in the 90s and in the early 2000s, it was talked about. But I feel like, in the past 10 years, it's really escalated and it's really built up, and it's gone from, mainly like something that was talked a lot about gym goers mainly, right? And people trying to build muscle, but it's really expanded now. So I guess that would be a good starting point, is like your journey with creatine and where you've got to now in terms of your research and what you're currently most interested in.
Yeah, it's a perfect segue. As you mentioned, it was discovered in 1832, but it didn't get popular until 1992 when Linford Christie won the gold medal in the
Barcelona. Best Olympics of all times.
And when he was asked what he was taking, one of the things, not the only thing, but one of the things he was taking was creatine. And at the same time, Roger Harris and Eric Holtman put out the seminal study that showed that if you take this product in a little bit higher amounts than what we're normally seeing, we can saturate the muscle. And then when you look in your biochemistry and exercise physiology textbooks, you're like, wow, this creatine molecule helps maintain ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. And sure enough, it's exploded. And I did my master's degree in a non-essential amino acid, glutamine, and it turned out to be worthless from a muscle or strength performance perspective. But at the same time, my really good colleague, Dr. Darren Burke, was researching creatine. And I've heard about creatine. I was actually taking it myself. And we started to notice that young males primarily were definitely getting bigger, stronger, faster when they were taking the supplement engaged in weight training. And then you start to see multiple studies, Paul Greenhalgh, Mark Tarnopolsky, all these world leaders putting out the same reputable evidence. And then you start thinking, what other populations could benefit from having more muscle mass, strength, and functionality? And that's kind of where my research evolved. It went from young individuals, and we're still very interested in those populations, but it sort of evolved to more clinical applications, maybe to older adults and to more disease state populations. And you're right, it's evolved from just athletes, and now it's taken on this global roller coaster or a tidal wave. And pretty much anybody on the planet, there's no reason they can't consume creatine because they're already making it in the body.
Yeah, and I guess it's a really good place to start. I mean, we're mainly interested. Well, we have a big interest in the athlete population, but I
Yes.
really want to get into the well-being population. But like, for those, I mean, it might not be true, but many might be listening to this podcast and they might not even know have even heard of creatine.
Right. Yes.
Right. Yep. So, how is creatine produced?
Yep.
And I guess when we take it supplementary, how is that produced as well? Where is that actually coming from?
Yeah, let's start with, I guess, creatine 101. So it's a nitrogen-containing compound. It's similar to an amino acid, but it's actually not an amino acid. And we naturally get it in red meat and seafood. So if you're consuming animal-based proteins, you're getting a small amount, about maybe 1 to 3 grams. I think if you're on a carnivore diet, you're probably getting 3 grams. But alternatively, we also create it in our own body, in the liver and the brain. And again, we're producing about maybe 1 to 2 grams per day. So when you add up diet and our natural synthesis, it accumulates up to about anywhere between 3 to 5 grams a day. But keep in mind, we do metabolize and excrete about 2 to 3 grams of that as well down the urine per day. So we have a net small surplus. The question comes, do we need more? The technical answer is likely yes in certain circumstances, but the vegans and vegetarians out there are obviously living very healthy, successful lives, can exercise, many things like that. So it's not an essential nutrient. We think it's a conditionally essential because over 1,000 studies now have accumulated showing that a little bit more in the daily diet has some profound beneficial effects.
So is that kind of, I guess, a difference between, I mean, sounds surviving and thriving, I guess. I mean, you can survive without it, but if you want to thrive and be the best version of yourself, which most of us do, I would hope, is probably a good thing to be supplementing with.
Yeah, like it's hard to compare sometimes to protein, but the RDA for protein, 0.8 grams, you rarely see any exercising individuals consuming that low of protein. It's basically saying that 98% of our population will not experience disease-like symptoms. However, it's well studied now. Obviously, Eric Helms has talked about this in his meta-analysis, and Stu Phillips, Luke Van Loon, that more protein is very beneficial. And that's why we're sort of in the camp of more creatine is beneficial. And it's not just from a muscle perspective. I'm sure today we're going to talk about bone, the immune system, and potentially brain. We think the good collaborating and accumulating evidence suggests that a little bit more, not a lot, but a little bit more, if it does accumulate, it can have some profound beneficial effects to the body.
Yeah, and I guess then, so with it then, like when it comes to the creatine, the supplementation alone doesn't really seem to be enough to have the biggest effect, right? It needs to be done in conjunction with some kind of exercise, some kind of resistance training, and that would seem to be the case through all populations as well, from old to young. So do you want to explain a little bit about how it's working and why it kind of needs to be done with almost like it almost seems to be come out and it's benefits with any type of stress almost, cognitive stress, sleep stress, physical stress. It's like a stress responder almost.
Yeah. So it's an evolution to that answer. So let's start about what creatine really is. It helps maintain the energy currency of our cell. So if we answer your question just focusing on muscle, and I think that's why a lot of people take creatine, they heard is really good for your muscle, and it's 100% true, that as the muscle has more creatine or phosphocreatine, it sort of enables the muscle fiber to have more energy status when they're performing exercise such as weight training or whichever it is. So it's really viable and really advantageous when you're combining with exercise. There is a handful of studies that had no exercise intervention in the studies and showed some small muscle performance benefits. But I love that question because the answer actually has evolved. You don't get any bone benefits without exercise, but there you do get some cognitive or memory benefits without structured exercise training. But to your point, it only seems to occur when the brain is stressed, such as sleep deprivation, hypoxia. So again, those categories almost mimic exercise. You're putting a stress to the body and it does respond. And I agree with you. Creatine is sort of like this superhero that comes to the rescue when the body's under mechanical stress from exercise or activities of daily living.
So has there been any research done in like altitude adaptation in creatine? Like
Simulated hypoxia, there's been a few studies. The best one is when sleep-deprived individuals volunteer, and that seems to have the greatest effect from the neck up.
Right, very good, very interesting. And I remember I read a study of yours that looked at it was, I think it was 8 grams of creatine that showed no effect in the bone when taking I think it was was it Brazilian study? I think a study out of Brazil that had 8 grams and it showed no effects. But is that no effect in the bone mainly due to the fact that they weren't doing any exercise at the same time? And if they were, we would have seen an effect with a much lower, maybe a lower dose, like a 5-gram dose or something.
Yeah, and that's an important distinction. So the Brazilian group, who are fantastic researchers, they looked at 1 gram a day and 3 grams a day without exercise all the way for 2 straight years and saw no bone beneficial effects. Where our lab and Dr. Phil Chillibeck, that's just up a few hours north of me here, when you combine creatine, about 8 to 12 grams, with exercise training, primarily weight training, but we did add in brisk walking. Older adults did see some improvements in bone mineral density loss. So the people on creatine didn't lose bone mineral density nearly as much. And older postmenopausal females actually preserve bone structure a little bit more there as well. So you're 100% correct. Without exercise training, the bone does not seem to respond to creatine. And even in response, it's very, very minimal. The ironic thing is when you collapse all the studies, exercise, non-exercise, we just don't see a significant improvement in bone mineral whatsoever with creatine. If anything, it seems to have a bone preserving effect in certain circumstances.
Yeah, which is super important as you get older.
It is.
Right? Because if you can preserve your bone, it's just as good as building bone, really, isn't it? I mean, because you're losing it so quickly as you get older.
And again, the driving force there has to be exercise, because you need the mechanical stimuli pulling on the muscle, which directly pulls on the bone when you're doing activities of daily living throughout the day.
Which is actually exactly the same way collagen works.
Yes,
like we know, like taking in collagen. Collagen on its own generally doesn't do anything. But if you take it before exercise, when you're pulling on the bone with the tendons, it seems to have.
Yeah, the more stress the body, it sort of initiates more recovery aspect. And we can talk about the brain, because that seems to, if the brain is not stressed, highly likely is going to cause any meaningful effects.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And then, but with the exercise, because where creatine, for people who are listening, where creatine really comes into effect, one of the main effectors is it's a training effect, right? Because it allows you to do a few more reps, a few more sets, and that's where it really comes into its fruition. Yeah. So if you are taking creatine, you really want to see the benefits. Is there anything that we should be aware of in terms of like almost sets and reps and where we need to be going? I mean, it sounds like we need to be going almost to failure to really get the benefits of taking the creatine around our exercise.
Yeah, I think if you're taking creatine supplementation, a couple things to look out for is that you'll likely experience an improvement in doing more reps and or the ability to perform higher loads, such as strength, and recover quicker in between the sessions. So I really like this idea of getting people into the gym or training more frequent. Obviously, that's the thing that causes the magnitude of change. Creatine might help you there. And there is some mechanisms why we think it does. We can talk about, everything from satellite cells to growth factors to our decreasing inflammation. But there are some good mechanisms explaining why individuals seem to get an increase in lean body mass or muscle size. Strength for sure. I think strength is the most robust evidence, and then functionality. So for the athletes looking for greater recovery, improvements in lean body mass, muscle performance, creatine's got to be in the top 3 worldwide for things to consider, especially from a muscle performance perspective. Like if you ask me, the number one reason that we would take creatine regarding muscle, it's not lean body mass, it's the improvement in strength. And from a longevity perspective, it's likely that the decrease in strength is the number one reason we can't live as we get older free of caregivers or independently.
Yeah, well, it's almost like the double whammy for aging, right? Because if you can help with your sarcopenia and your bone density, it's just total winner.
We literally have papers in review right now. We're promoting that basically creatine and exercise should be at least considered in the treatment program for those with osteoporosis, sarcopenia, and metabolic conditions, things like that.
One question that jumped into mind when you mentioned recovery. What about recovery between sets?
Yeah.
We talked about recovery after sessions. Yeah. Does that mean that we could, is speed up recovery between sets as well?
Yeah, not only is it recovery between sets, but in theory, it's recovery after the muscle contraction. So, for example, if you were to do 4 sets of leg press, you will notice that ideally you'll have more cellular energy getting ready for set 2, 3, and then the final one compared to placebo. And studies gone back 30 years clearly showing that on creatine, you do not get the drop off that you do in performance. So, for example, on creatine, if you were able to do 10 repetitions the first set, maybe placebo group did 10 as well. But on set 2, the creatine group might be able to squeak out 9, whereas now the placebo group only could do 7. And set 3, creatine is doing 8, placebo's down to 2. So that's where the training volume maintenance, or over time, the driving force is an increase in exercise capacity. And creatine really seems to have a favorable effect in that way.
Yeah, well, perfect for most people are pretty time poor, right? So
yes,
you don't have time to be, if you can shave down that recovery time to 1 minute rather than 3, you're gonna think about how much time you're going to save in your week if you're doing a lot of sessions.
So I'll put it this way. If you were to do a maximal set, really did as much as you can, the good linear curves will show anywhere between 3 to 5 minutes for your phosphocreatine stores when you're resting through the mitochondria to come back. And if you're on supplementation, maybe they can speed up to maybe 2 to 3 minutes or a little bit faster. So you're right. Everybody's excuse is I don't have any time. Maybe this might encourage some people to exercise a little bit quicker, but still get the benefits from it.
So it's kind of a lot of it is in that time to failure, right? So it's just more reps, greater time to failure.
Yeah.
When one of the, like I said to you at the start, like a lot of athletes who are watching this as well, they're a lot of endurance athletes.
Yes.
And so I guess within the endurance world, there is 2 schools of thoughts, right? One is that they believe that creatine isn't really beneficial for an endurance athlete because it's a non-explosive, non-strength event. But another thing that they're really concerned about is the weight gain, the water retention, right? Yeah. So it comes up against a lot of stick or a lot of resistance in that regard. And just to give it a bit of background, I used to do a lot of Ironman triathlon, but I've more recently got into high rocks, which is this combination of running and weight training and weights, right? So there's a big aspect of the resistance, and particularly fatigue resistance, right? Because you're lunging 100 meters, you're doing 100 wall balls, so it's very repetitive. But you've got this running component that's basically 8K of flat out running. So, creatine is like one of these things that's a bit scary. It's like it's a push and a pull in that regard.
Yeah.
So, where could we start with? I mean, I guess firstly, is creatine of a performance benefit for an endurance athlete, like a marathon runner, triathlete, high rocks athlete?
Yeah, it's really changed as well. So we put out a big paper a few years ago looking at all the endurance type of sports, and it's very interesting. So, for example, let's talk about the mechanisms. We think for the endurance athletes, we see improvements in agility, recovery, but it really comes from the longer you do exercise. So you talk about marathon and triathlon. Some of the best lines of evidence show that creatine acts as an anti-inflammatory or anti-catabolic agent, sort of allows the body after an excessive volume of exercise to recover quicker. So that could have applications to allow you to recover and get back to training. And so there's a lot of other benefits. But regarding weight gain, I think a lot of people make a big error with creatine, and I think for your viewers, this is crucial. Most will do a loading phase, and that's about 20 grams a day for 5 or 7 days. And although that is very viable and it's the most rapid way to saturate your muscle, the problem is creatine is osmotic, and it likes sodium to get into the cell. So with sodium, you're dragging water to maintain equilibrium. And so you usually get an increase in intracellular water, which is great. Your muscles are full of water, and that can drive some of the cellular benefits. The downfall is a lot of people say, wow, I gained 2 or 3 pounds or even more in the first week during the loading phase. Young females hate that. And of course, individuals like you in your sport, carrying around more weight is definitely at a disadvantage for long duration sport. So we don't recommend the loading phase for weight type of sports like you're in. We would do a lot smaller dose. And then the new thing we're looking at is microdosing. So I'll give you an example. If you're typically taking maybe 5 to 10 grams a day, what if you did like 2 grams a day 5 times, or 3 grams a day, 3 times a day? Do you retain more? Does that decrease any of the issues with bloating or GI tract or even net water retention? And it is likely, because it's a smaller osmotic push, it still causes the benefits in the cell, but we start to see a lot of individuals say, I'm not experiencing the bloating or potential GI tract stress, and that way they can get the benefits without making an error in taking it.
So with that, have you found that it does seem to be, that's something that you have found, it seems to be an improvement in weight gain if you're kind of micro dosing? I mean,
yeah, 100%. We've done that now in young and older individuals, and not a single person has complained about weight gain. So we're really happy, and the results will be coming out soon. Yeah.
And with the dosing, I mean, I've heard a lot of different reports of what dose has been, and it seems to be like you almost have to go up with what you're trying to achieve. It's like 5 grams for the muscle, 10 grams for the brain, 20 grams for the bone, almost.
Yeah.
Is that true? And as you go up to 20 grams, does the risk of water gain increase, obviously? So
yeah, you hit the nail on it. I think I'm leading the charge with the higher dose. I think I've come on so many podcasts talking about, now let's look at creatine, not just for muscle, but a whole body perspective. So if we start at each tissue, if you say, I'm only taking creatine for muscle, 2 to 5 grams a day, that's perfect. You will saturate your muscle in as little as a month, if not 21 days, and you can take a small dose for the rest of your life. Then we look at bone. The lowest dose ever been shown is about 8 grams. And then when you look from the neck up, the most elegant studies, and we need to do a lot of dosing studies, but the most elegant studies show that the 20-gram loading phase seems to allow accumulation across the blood-brain barrier. So you can't decide, I want to take 3 grams tomorrow for muscle. On Wednesday, I'm going to take more for bone. So I personally take 10 grams. When you do the average amount for each of those tissues, 10 grams seems to be a very viable daily dose. There's no adverse effects. We've given that now for over 2 years to postmenopausal females. Is that the best dose? We have no idea. What is the best dose? We don't know yet, because there's some studies in the brain that have shown that 30 grams can get into the brain. And then in muscle, we've had as little as 2 grams from a maintenance amount. So I think we're desperate for dosing to come up the optimal dose. The good thing is that the timing of creatine ingestion doesn't seem to really matter. You can take it whenever's convenient for you. But as we get to a higher daily amount, I think it's just like protein. It's kind of likely you're going to take a little bit smaller each time. So for me, on a 10-gram daily amount, at least, I take 5 grams with breakfast, and I actually put 5 grams in a water bottle, and I drink it during my workout. That's easy for me. Other people say I put it in breakfast, lunch, dinner, and go on. So whatever's most consistent. But the nice thing is, unlike caffeine, the timing seems to be irrelevant. So whatever works for you is ideal.
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, in an ideal world, if you could actually remember, you could do 2.5, 2.5, 2.5.
Yeah.
But with the 8 grams in the bone, if you're doing like 5 grams and you're doing resistance training, it could potentially be, you might need a little bit less potentially.
Yeah, and then of course you add in how much are you naturally eating, how much you're actually synthesizing. So that 8 gram minimum was the supplemental form, and again, even going all the way up to about 11 or 12 grams, the bone benefits were so small. It was in an aging population, but again, it never had any bad effects. So if you're taking creatine for muscle, maybe think in the back of your mind, it might have some bone benefits later on in life. That's what our hope is.
Yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating, and I think from an endurance standpoint, one thing that when I had Eric Helms on this podcast, one thing that he did mention, he said that he felt like if you weren't seeing some weight gain with creatine, that you probably weren't seeing an effect. Is that well, I've never heard that before. Is that true, or is it?
I think what he means is you usually want to have that osmotic effect at the beginning, because as you swell the cell, it turns on all the genes and pathways that are involved in protein synthesis. And likely, if you're taking it, you're a responder. So there's a difference between someone who responds and a non-responder. A non-responder means that they have no greater than 10 millimole increase in dry muscle mass with creatine. Other people respond very well. So let's put it into practical terms. An omnivore likely will respond to creatine, but not nearly the same way as a vegan. Vegans are not getting any dietary creatine, so they respond the best. The population that responds the least are simply on a carnivore diet where they're probably consuming so much meat, they're getting a lot of creatine already. Again, when we talk about responders and non-responders, that's only from muscle. We have no idea from a bone or immune system or brain response. So I think that's what Eric was meaning. Maybe you want the scale to go up in the initial stages because that causes the anabolic response to the muscle.
Yeah. I mean, and then the last question on the dosing, which has always been one that's been always on my mind, is that if you dose, and say you're someone who takes creatine habitually for years and years and years, probably like yourself, you're taking
25 years straight. Yeah, absolutely.
25 years straight. Would your requirement become, so like for omega-3s, for example, if you take a lot of omega-3s, you can get your omega-3 index up to 11, 12%, for example, or really high. And then you can really bring down the dose. And even if you miss like 3 or 4 days, you'll kind of stay there. Is that how creatine can work? Is that if you do it for long enough, you can bring down your dose, and therefore, if an endurance athlete is worried about weight gain coming up to an event, would a specific strategy be that you kind of longitudinally use 5 to 10 grams a day, and then in the week or the 10 days before you stop using it, would you still get some benefit from its residual effects come to the race?
It's a great question because if you were to focus 5 years ago, this question comes up just on muscle, piece of cake to answer. Once the muscle is full, you need as little as 2 grams a day for the rest of your life to maintain that level. But then all of a sudden we got into bone research and brain research, and we're like, oh, wait a minute. Now, hopefully you have excess amount coming in that's trickling into your bone tissue when it needs it, or more specifically your brain. So we used to be in the camp where creatine was only needed on the days you work out. And if you're only taking it from a muscle perspective, like a decade ago, after your muscles are full, you can drop it down to as little as 2 grams a day and maintain those levels. But now with the explosion of other areas, we're in the camp of taking it every day and take more in hope. Some will go down the toilet in the form of creatinine, but I really think in today's society, the brain will act sort of like a vacuum. And when it's stressed, it will now take in more through circulation. So I find it fascinating with the evolution in creatine research. I think it's gone from just athletes to a global health compound. And that's why I think a little bit more might serve a lot of populations better.
Yeah, I mean, the brain is a very, very hungry organ generally, isn't it? So it will always, if it can take it, it would take it. But I guess from what you said at the start, from a, if you're an athlete and you're primarily only concerned about your performance on race day, and you do have a little bit of a concern about any weight gain, it is a viable option to stop the week before, and you'll get the best of both worlds. You just might lose a bit from your from the brain and a bone standpoint.
And keep in mind at that point, once your muscles are full, it takes about 4 weeks for them to come back to baseline, even if you stop creatine supplementation whatsoever. So if you go on vacation or you have a big event and it's weight sensitive, you can stop taking creatine. The benefits are going to be in the muscle, and it takes about 4 weeks to come off it.
Yeah, very good. And then with the timing, you mentioned the timing doesn't seem to matter. But if you, from an athlete's standpoint, just to go back to what you said earlier, is that creatine seems to respond very well to the movement of the muscle and the pulling on the tendon. So but I know that some of your research, you found that post creatine seems to be better than pre creatine. So in terms of, if we are going to look for with athletes, we're really looking to really optimize, when would be the best time? Even from a, I guess let's talk about it first from a strength standpoint, and then secondly from an endurance standpoint. They might be a little bit different.
I think the best way to answer it is in close proximity to exercise seems to be advantageous either pre, during, or post. And I think what we see is that muscle contractions open the doorways to allow creatine in. So if you were to consume it an hour before your run or workout, or during, like I do, or even after, that seems to be a very viable time. But we have seen studies where you take it in the morning and late in the evening, and you can get some benefits there as well. But I always make sure one dose is in close proximity to exercise.
Yeah. Okay. So whether it's pre, post, or during, it actually has
We're not seeing, and we have some studies right now going on in the lab, and the most unique one is to finally answer: does the timing matter? And one group is actually taking creatine only on their rest days. So that answers the question. If creatine in close proximity to exercise is that important, you would suspect that the group that's taking creatine only on their resting days won't improve nearly as much as the other group. And we should have that paper out in the new year. Yeah.
Very cool. So with the, I mean, I know that I think a real common way for many to take creatine is post-workout with their protein shake.
Right. Yeah.
I know there's a lot of things that can help and hinder creatine. So I know like caffeine's been like high doses of caffeine, for example, in coffee is probably not the best thing to do. But what about, so let's talk about the negative ones. But firstly, what about with protein? How's it working in conjunction with protein? And are you getting a bit more bang for your buck? And is it working in conjunction?
Yeah, there's been a few studies showing that creatine with whey protein has been having favorable effects in older as well as younger individuals. So you get the anabolic protein synthetic response from the protein. And then, of course, creatine works a little bit differently, but it's sort of a synergistic effect there. I think a cool study that's coming up, hopefully, is creatine and collagen to see if there actually is any promise there for like maybe arthritis or inflammation. But going back to your creatine caffeine thing, this is the one I get yelled at a lot on social media. So there's a big thing. As soon as you say caffeine, the brain immediately says coffee.
Yeah.
And I'll say, you know what? The best research that have looked at the interference of caffeine, and it was caffeine powder and creatine. The dose was about 250 milligrams of caffeine. So that's going to be a larger, extra large coffee. So if you're dumping your creatine in your normal coffee in the morning, drinking it, no problem. Even if you did that for a few coffees in the morning, no issue. It seems like the dose of caffeine needs to be very, very high. And then you would argue if you're sipping on a large coffee, heating it up in the microwave, heating again, the heat does denature creatine a bit. So the best studies seem to suggest that the interference is based on the dose of caffeine. But again, if you're tea and coffee, that should be fine because the dose is typically under 250 milligrams.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I think with all these things, especially dealing with athletes, it's compliance is the key, right? And to get it done regularly. And I always, like, coffee is just such an easy one because it's such an habitual thing to do in the morning. So the more you can kind of dump into it, the better. But I remember when we had Professor Keith Barr on, and he came, he was talking about collagen, and he was saying very much the same, is that, you know, caffeine in your collagen in your coffee seems to be okay. But if you're having more than 2 big cups of coffee, the caffeine dose is too high. But where it becomes into a real problem is often athletes will mix it with their pre-workout. Pre-workout formulas, and they are like mega high in caffeine. So that's where we can have some problems.
And then you look at what else is in there. If it's essential amino acids, beetroot juice, we never know what's actually causing the benefits or the side effects. And again, there's some studies that show really good synergistic benefits between coffee or caffeine and creatine. But the higher the dose of caffeine, although the pharmacokinetics don't interfere, there's something going on, and we think it's about calcium. Caffeine likes to release calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and creatine likes to take it back in. So it's like they play tug of war, but there's never been an interference on muscle hypertrophy over the long term. So the jury's still out. I personally don't do it because the evidence out of Europe, to me anyway, as a scientist, it looks like there's something there. And since the timing is irrelevant, I love coffee. I'll have that in the morning and then wait a few hours and have my big protein breakfast with creatine, and then I drink it later on. So I never worry about it. It doesn't seem to play a negative role.
Could there be any like interaction or effects between adenosine, caffeine, and creatine? Because it's obviously it's down. Adenosine is adenosine triphosphate, and it's downstream, and then the adenosine receptors for caffeine.
We don't see any interference with creatine as an adenosine antagonist. But they can influence a little bit of potassium or calcium. So there's some potential interference. The one seems to be mainly calcium. But again, when they get a beneficial effect, they can both have, I would have caffeine and creatine in my top 3 for sure from a muscle performance perspective. So if they're that beneficial, how could they actually hate each other? So I just don't think they do. But maybe if you're taking a really high dose, doesn't interfere. The argument to that is, if you're taking a high dose of caffeine, maybe we need to increase the dose of creatine to offset the effects. So that's why dosing studies, I think, are the big way to go.
Yeah, I mean, caffeine's a very obvious ergogenic aid, right? I mean,
Exactly.
I always say, caffeine, it used to be on the banned list, the wider
Yes.
banned list
Yep.
so anything that used to be on the banned list and now isn't, is probably a benefit, right? For good reason,
Exactly.
because it is definitely having some sort of effect. We talk, there's a lot of different creatines on the market as well. Also even different forms, like you have the creatine gummies, for example, and there's lots of different types of creatine. I know that, like I often hear different types of creatine saying they have more bioavailability than a typical monohydrate, but like monohydrate is almost like 100% bioavailable. Correct.
Yeah. So when I was saying creatine, and I can't speak for you, but I've only meant monohydrate.
Yeah.
So that means a water molecule linked to the creatine. And the totality of evidence-based research looks at creatine monohydrate for safety and efficacy. And Rick Kreider put out a really good paper a few years ago showing that creatine monohydrate's on top of the mountain and all the other marketed forms are way lower. Now, some types of creatine, if it is creatine, has been shown to get into the muscles, so therefore it is a valid source, but no study has ever shown it to be superior. I worry for the consumer because all these new marketed forms are way more expensive. They don't have the safety profile as monohydrate. And at the end of the day, you're right. Creatine monohydrate is near 100% bioavailable. So how could you beat that? And even if you could, if you got to 100% pure, doesn't mean it's going to get into your cells, especially bone and brain. We don't know that. So I think your viewers should say, I know the monohydrate's been around forever. CreaPure is the best creatine monohydrate on the planet. It's rigorously tested, third-party tested, is very viable. I think your viewers would be looking at a product with CreaPure or a very reputable source of monohydrate. It has GRAS status, generally recognized as safe in the United States. And again, when we refer to creatine, I always talk about monohydrate.
And what about like because I often see the creatine gummies now.
Yep.
Are they? I mean, if it's a creatine, I mean, provided it's monohydrate in the gummy, of course.
Yes.
I mean, is that quite? I mean, I'm just thinking, children. One of the things I mentioned before was I have a 5 and a 7-year-old, and I listened to you on the Rhonda Patrick podcast, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. So anyone who's listened to this could definitely have a download of that one as well. And you mentioned of benefit to children.
Right.
So I guess that's what I was thinking with the gummies, that, if I could get some gummies for my children, they would definitely be. We have probiotic gummies, for example, and they love them, and they're really easy for them to take.
Yeah.
So first, are the gummies a viable option in terms of the way they get into the system?
Yeah, so I advise for a company called Create, and they're one of the few that actually has creatine in there from independent third-party testing. And unfortunately, there's a lot of companies out there that when the gummy gets tested, there was no creatine in there. There was creatinine. And so for those that are considering the candy or gummy for children or convenience, make sure that the product actually has third-party tested and creatine is in there. So the gummy is relatively solid, so it should be stable. The downfall with creatine, it doesn't like moisture or water, so that's probably likely why a lot of the products may not hold water. But I know Create just came out with something from Eurofins showing it does. So it is a viable option. The only downfall is we need a peer-refereed study showing that, hey, we gave individuals the gummy compared to a placebo gummy, and the gummy got creatine in the bloodstream and then into the cell. So that's how we would determine it. But I eat gummies all day long too. I can see why children would like it. They're sweetened with stevia or something like that, and they're very tasty and convenient, easy to travel with instead of the white powder. So it's a viable way to get creatine in there. The key is make sure that the product you're choosing is a viable source of creatine.
And would it be comparable to powder? Would you say that's I mean, because you can do a non-creatine gummy to a creatine gummy, but what about a creatine gummy to a good powder like a pill or a creatine?
And that's the studies we need to do. I would love to look at a dose of powder compared to how much the gummy, and if the gummy is equivalent, then you would say it's a very viable source, but we need to have those studies done before we can actually conclude that.
Well, I guess that is a great segue to specific populations. And like I said, like one of the things that really sparked my interest when I listened to you on the Rhonda Patrick podcast was you talked about children, infants. So I heard that there are some states in America that are trying to ban the use of creatine.
Yes.
In children. So it's obviously, I think, but that was my theory, or I was a bit hesitant about it because I've heard a few rumors and worrisome comments about that. So maybe you could speak about the benefits for children and how it could be used, and also some of the dosing.
Yeah, so unfortunately, some children who are born with creatine deficiency syndrome, they can't make creatine naturally. It leads to a lot of unfortunate health implications. And when you supplement their diet with creatine, those issues go away. And a couple great researchers put in multiple review articles now busting the myths about creatine for children and adolescents. And we always still caution, just like pregnancy or anybody taking a supplement, make sure it's right for you. But at recommended viable dosages, which we've talked about today, we just don't see any adverse effects. We do need to do a little bit more blood work and looking at kidney and liver function. But, these children are naturally producing it as we speak. If their body doesn't like it, they would excrete it. And we're not talking about mega dosages, but 2 to 3, even up to 5 grams a day would be a very viable amount. You can break it up. It's the same amount they're getting if they eat a piece of salmon or a hamburger. It's not different. But the benefits seem to be from agility and potentially from a coordination perspective. They're too early to look at bone mineral density and things like that, but I think there's going to be some more research in that area for sure.
So is there any, so could this be like, how young are we talking where we could potentially start?
It was as young as possible, really. I struggle to find anybody if they're not already making it. It's kind of like telling a 2-year-old you can't have protein in milk.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah.
And
if your body makes it itself,
exactly,
you can't really say it's not a benefit, right?
And from a concussion perspective, the only study was in children, unfortunately, in Europe. And when these children got concussed or head trauma, they were put on 0.4 grams per kilogram, so about 20 grams of creatine for several months. And it really seemed to improve or speed up post-concussion syndrome symptoms,
And in other populations, we'll definitely get into the elderly, which we've already talked about. As well as children, you also mentioned like fetal and pregnancy. And I mean that's also a fascinating area. So I guess is that also that's some emerging research that it could be good during pregnancy as well for the fetus.
Yeah, it's beyond fascinating. So Dr. Stacey Ellery in Australia is leading the charge, and they looked at the spiny mouse, and then they looked at the sheep model there, obviously for ethical purposes to make sure obviously it's safe, and it seemed to be, and had some potential for brain or placenta bioenergetics, and not only for the mother, but for the fetal development as well. And I believe she just presented with me in Munich last month at the creatine conference, showing some elegant research about safety and actually some of the mechanisms and how it should improve some of the health implications for not only the mother, but the fetal development. And they actually have human trials going on and upcoming. We need big randomized control trials for efficacy. But obviously, Stacey would agree with this. Make sure you speak to your medical practitioner, especially if you are pregnant or thinking of it, and just make sure creatine is right for you. We don't see any interference with other medications, but again, it's a supplement, and hopefully you're taking every precaution, and we strongly suggest caution. But as it currently stands, we don't see any reason someone can't.
I mean, I can't imagine. Obviously, I work at a university too, and I know ethics is very tricky.
Yes.
And I can imagine getting the ethics approval for those sorts of studies.
She's doing exceptional work. She's quite remarkable.
Yeah. And then, is there any differences then that we should be thinking about in just males versus females generally in terms of timing and dosages and are there some major differences there?
Yeah, the good thing is we don't see hardly any differences. Both biological males and females respond exceptionally well. The only issue that we see, and there's only been a few studies that have looked at this, is that it seems like females do not experience the decrease in protein breakdown like males do. We're not sure why. Maybe estrogen is involved. And then when we look at the increase in lean body mass, again, not muscle, but lean body mass, and muscle is a component of that, males seem to improve lean body mass a bit more. So two things come to mind. It could be estrogen or fluctuations in water during the menstrual cycle that could be causing some of those differences. But we see phenomenal benefits for biological females from a muscle performance, power recovery, bone mineral, bone preservation, and even lean body mass things. So the females watching, please don't be hesitant. The other big one we haven't talked about is fat mass. So there's a big myth out there that when you're taking creatine, you're going to gain body mass and i.e. fat mass because people feel a little bit heavier. And when you look at the data, this is important. You actually experience a decrease in body fat. Not a lot, about 0.5 kilograms or about 1%. Your lean mass typically goes up by about 1 to 2 kilograms. So overall, you should only expect maybe a 0.5 to maybe 1 kilogram increase on the scale. But keep in the back of your mind, fat is likely going down and maybe bone and or muscle is going up, especially with exercise. So I think that's something that's really encouraging for a lot of individuals, primarily females.
Yeah, I mean, I know that my wife takes creatine, and she's always talking. Oh, is it putting on any weight on me? I think it's always a concern. But like even what you mentioned, the males seem to gain a little bit more lean mass than the female. Yeah. It's still a net positive for the females.
That's right.
It's overall good. Fat mass down, lean mass up. It's only of great benefit. Right.
Correct. Yeah.
No, it's that's super encouraging. And then the last, I guess, is in the populations would be we've already talked about it, but the elderly,
yes,
and the aging populations, and I guess one of the things with the elderly is that the ability to move and do resistance training becomes harder, right?
Yes.
So for those sorts of populations, is there anything that we should be considering in terms of higher dosages, or is it almost any type of exercise, like just a brisk walk that can help?
Yeah, so you talked briefly about sarcopenia, the age-related reduction in strength and muscle mass and functionality and, bone loss everybody's familiar with. So the driver and the most important thing is exercise, and I would really strongly encourage weight-bearing or resistance type of training, because that type of exercise gives you a lot of benefits that cardio do, and then in addition, you get the strength and muscle mass, which is crucially important. So for those that are about 40 to 50 and above, please make sure exercise is the foundation. Secondly, protein is the nice icing on that exercise cake, and then creatine is the sprinkles that might allow you to exercise a little bit more. So I do argue that as we get older, just like anabolic resistance with protein, you need more protein, and it's likely that you need more creatine. And we've actually shown now in a meta-analysis that creatine kinetics in older adults can be reduced compared to younger individuals. So if they are reduced, you're going to need a bit more to get the same relative effect. So
could you put in, how much would you be talking? We were up to 20 grams a day almost?
No, not that much. So if the average young person is taking anywhere between 2 or 5 grams seems to be the daily dose, I would suggest anywhere between a little bit more up to 10 grams for an older adult. That's a healthy person. If they're disease state, you may want to consider a bit more, but you have to really slowly progress. Again, those dosing studies need to be there, but I'm a big proponent that 10 grams seems to hit most avenues on a daily basis.
Yeah. So, it seems like, the 10 gram mark is kind of almost the gold standard area, really, and microdosing. Microdosing through the day is probably the best way for an endurance athlete.
But keep in mind, I believe if you're taking 5 grams, you're going to get to it. It's just going to be slower. Like, I got to believe 5 grams is definitely going to saturate your muscle. It's highly likely if you've been taking 5 grams for years, you're going to get some into the bone and brain. And so if people are saying, hey, you know what, I'm just going to stick to my regular 5 grams, that's great. At least you're getting it in addition to your diet. And I would be shocked if you weren't getting bone and brain benefits. It might take a year or two, but at least you're probably getting some of those benefits.
Yeah. It's quite crazy, isn't it? We've talked from as young, infants to, it is really something that we can take for every day for all of our lives. So is there any benefit of cycling it and taking it out and bringing it back in at any time?
So the theory with cycling is once your muscles were full, it made no sense to keep taking in high amounts because you're just going to excrete it down the toilet. And then all of a sudden we talked about the bone and the brain maybe taking it in a little bit more. So
Old science now.
Yeah, we don't know if there is a benefit to cycling it multiple times versus continuous. I think, though, logically, it makes sense to take it on a daily basis. For all those other areas, we know the heart, obviously the immune system, these are the areas I think on a daily basis. It's consistent. If you exercise daily, consider that on a daily basis as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and also compliance. Like,
yes.
You know what it's like. Habits are the way to get things done.
Yep. Yes,
as soon as if you have any supplement that you take once a week, you forget to take it.
Yes, and it's not going to work. Creatine needs to accumulate. Exactly.
Yeah, it's really funny.
Yeah.
And then I guess with are there any? I mean, we often hear about like kidney damage and dehydration, and even sometimes I've heard rumors about creatine increasing cramping.
Oh yeah,
which is a major concern for Ironman or triathletes or those endurance athletes.
Yeah.
Is that actually really an area for concern for general populations?
During the loading phase, when you look at some of the GI or anecdotal issues, the incidence of muscle cramping or GI tract irritation is equivalent or slightly a little bit higher than placebo. But when you're taking the smaller, more daily dosages, if anything, creatine does the opposite. It superhydrates the muscles, so cramping and dehydration actually goes down.
Yeah, well, that's amazing, isn't it? Well, that's what I always felt, because it's actually you're actually holding more water. Right. Really, it should be the. I mean, in that regard, would it actually, in some ways, help with your ability to compete in a hot environment?
It does, and that's why we say if you're doing 2-a-days in July, obviously you're now looking at this compound that can superhydrate intracellular water and extracellular water. So the plasma maintain more water, about 92%, which we're liking. So your hematocrit doesn't go up. So that causes a less strain on the cardiovascular system. So I totally agree. Exercise in hotter environments, this might actually aid as a superhydrating molecule.
Yeah, because it also creatine, I mean, we haven't even talked about this, is the vascular health side of things.
Yep.
It has a massive benefit because in just the vascular and the and even the blood pressure and
the big things with all those diseases, the main thing seems to decrease inflammation. So reactive oxidative species allows the mitochondria to actually have a more favorable environment. So it's actually a few studies came out this year looking at cardiac rehabilitation and maybe some endothelial function there as well.
Yeah, and reduced cytokine activity as well was a major one.
And that's the big one with your aerobic type of sports. Yeah. The longer you go, the more these cytokines get elevated, and creatine seems to squash those compared to placebo, allowing the individual who just ran 9-10 hours potentially to get back and recover quicker. So I always think of the Tour de France. They're killing their body 500 kilometers a day. Could this be, in addition to everything else, something to consider for recovery?
Yeah, and is there any? I mean, there's a lot. I mean, often when I hear with things like mopping up information, reducing information, like as I know as a coach and an athlete, we often say, "Oh no, it's changing. It's stopping my good adaptations."
Yeah, no.
You know, because we need some of that information. We need some of the reactive oxygen species.
Yeah.
Has anything been shown?
Chronic amounts, and it's just allowing the muscle environment to recover quicker.
Yeah.
So some of the best lines of evidence is that creatine acts as an anti-catabolic or anti-inflammatory agent. So it's not an Advil, but it kind of looks, or it sort of has some of those effects. And then you combine it with the anabolic processes, and that's why it seems to be an overall beneficial compound for some certain.
The body's a really smart thing as well, is that it won't allow. You know, it will never build up the anti-inflammatories so much and to stop the beneficial effects. And I know that for omega-3s have the same. You can take as many omega-3s as you like, and you'll never blunt any of the adaptation because you'll still have that underlying amount that will still, your body will still allow. So,
that's right.
So that kind of puts that one on to rest. And Darren, do you? I mean, this is the Pillar Performance podcast, and we love talking about supplements generally. Yeah. Besides creatine, do you take anything else at all?
Oh yeah, so I take whey protein and collagen. I mix that in the morning and using Greek yogurt with my creatine. I take omega-3s, vitamin D as well. And I started to take magnesium because I'm always stressed, so I'm always taking a little bit more magnesium. So vitamin D, I take a multivitamin when I'm traveling. It's just kind of something basic, but those are the staples. And of course, I don't even consider caffeine because I drink so much coffee that I'm always flooded with caffeine.
Like water.
Yeah, exactly. So those are my go-tos, and they're backed by a lot of good science. There's some new emerging ones out there, but those are the staples for sure. Yeah.
Have you we'll have to get you some of our Pillar triple
Yeah,
magnesium. We'll definitely get you
100%.
some
Yes,
sent
please.
over.
Yeah.
It's really, really good. It's kind of our
Okay.
our big product was
Yeah.
very, very popular. And it
Awesome.
tastes
Yeah.
amazing. So we'll
Okay.
definitely get some of that over to you.
Yeah.
Is there anything where people can follow you and keep up to date with your work in the creatine
Yeah,
space before
I
we
try
finish?
to be active on Instagram at Dr. Darren Candow. I try to promote not only our evidence-based research, but anything that's coming along. I think it's a fascinating tool. I think social media is fantastic for getting information out there. Hopefully, it's solid evidence-based research because there's a lot of things to disseminate between it. But at Dr. Darren Candow is probably the best thing to go for.
Yeah, perfect. I'm sure people will definitely be following you and loving to
Great.
keep up to date with the creatine there. But I really want to thank you for your time.
Great.
And I'm really grateful that you came on. And and all the best we're looking forward to maybe having you on in the future when you do some new research. There's so much to talk about, but it's been awesome. Thanks very much.
No, thanks for having me. Had a great time. Thank you.